Hello and welcome to the Mind Detox Podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Newbigging. I'm a trauma-aware therapeutic coach and meditation teacher known for unifying therapy and spirituality, and I'm the author of 12 books, including New Beginnings, Mind Calm, and Mind Detox. I've also been teaching my insights and techniques via my award-winning academy for almost 2 decades. For this podcast, I usually share extracts from my Calm Clan community webinars. I'm also sometimes joined by guest experts for the occasional chit-chat. All so you can heal the hidden causes of anything problematic going on in your life, and so you can access more peace and enjoy the best life possible. I've been a monk and had to get myself out of a spiritual cult. I have a busy clinic with lots of fascinating clients, stories and takeaways. I'm usually creating a course or writing a new book, and I'm on my own journey of healing and knowing myself. So thank you for joining me for this episode. You never quite know what you're going to get, but I hope you get a lot from listening. And without further ado, let's begin. Hello and welcome. Welcome to this workshop, this Calm Clan meeting on Svadhyaya. Svadhyaya means the study of the self, if you didn't know that already. You can actually break the word Svadhyaya into different component parts. The Sva means our own, or self, or the human soul. And Adhyaya means lesson, lecture, reading. So it kind of implies studying. Or if you take off the adhyaya and just make it daya, then you end up with the meaning of to contemplate, to think upon, to recollect, or to call to mind. So again, it translates into study. So Svadhyaya means the study of the self. And what self are we referring to? Well, there's kind of two selves that we're referring to. We've got the small self and the big self. And by that, I mean the self that's usually spelt with a small s, which is referring to our physical form, our body, our mind, our emotions, who we believe ourselves to be, the ego, essentially. And then you've got the big self, the self usually spelt with a capital S, and that's usually referring to the true self or real self, the Atman, which is a Sanskrit word, which sometimes refers to the self, or the divine within us, the divine within us. And in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Patanjali shares that if you study the self, you'll discover the divine. And so it's very much about discovering who you really are, beyond who we believe ourselves to be, beyond what we've been conditioned to believe ourselves to be, beyond what we've maybe been identifying in and drawing identity from over the years. It's a very important, big topic. And Sri Ramana Maharshi once said that our own self-realization is the greatest service we can render the world. Our own self-realization is the greatest service we can render the world. So it's sounds like a pretty big thing. And I've also over the years added that it's also the greatest service we can render ourselves, because the study of the self enables us to experience much more peace, more love, more joy, more presence, more playfulness, more aliveness, which are all wonderfully beautiful things. So why do we want to study the self? Well, for these reasons. We experience much more peace and presence because through the process of self-study, we are becoming less identified in the ego, in the mind, in the thinking mind. We're much more self-aware and present. We have greater strength and resilience. We're less caught up in the relative self, the relative world, all the ups and downs of the thinking and the thoughts and the feelings and the physical sensations and all that sort of stuff. Rooted in the source of who we are, there's nothing more powerful than that, because the source of who we are is also the source of all that is. And if if that's created all that is, has been, and ever will be, then it must be pretty darn powerful and big. And so when we're resting, recognizing that, we have a lot more resilience. We can battle is probably the wrong word, but we can weather the storms. We can, the ocean can be choppy at times, but we can know the depths of the self, depth of the ocean, and that leads to a lot of resilience. There's also a lot less fear, confusion, stress, struggle, and suffering. Confusion comes from overthinking, trying to figure things out, being far too much into the mind. And it also comes from a lack of trust. We're trying to figure things out on our own as opposed to letting all of this universe guide us, teach us, show us. We're trying to figure out on our own. There's a lot less stress, struggle, and suffering when we are embarking and we are practicing the study of the self. Why? Well, because we can discover that most of our problems are created and sustained by the illusionary, imaginary small self. If you don't believe me, this is why you want to do self-study. This is why you want to do self-study. When we start to investigate the source of our stress, the source of our suffering, the source of our struggle, we see that it's often due to what's happening in the realms of our mind and imagination. And in the mind, there's lots of judgment, resistance, attachment. There's the two doors of time where you can walk through the door of into the past and dwell and spend a lot of time there and start feeling everything and going over everything and reminiscing and everything that's gone over on the past. Or we can go through the different door into the realm of the future, start fixating about the future, having anxiety about getting anxiety about the future, becoming attached to a specific future. All of that's happening within the small self and the realms of the mind and imagination. In there's also often control due to the small self's prime objective of survival. And it's also rooted in a lot of lack in there because it's rooted in separation and isolation and me in a way against the world, or me and the world out there, or me and other over there. If we don't self-study, then we can often end up being victims to circumstance and at the effect of our conditioned small self. Our quality of life ends up dependent upon what's happening in our mind, what's happening in our emotions, what's happening in our body, what's happening in our life circumstances and the wider world. Our quality of life is completely like a puppet on the strings to all of that if we do not self-study and we don't know who we ultimately or what we ultimately are. In short, without the study of the self, we usually live in our mind, body, and world rather than live in the soul. If we don't self-study, we usually live in our mind and body and we don't live in our soul. And that's why concepts of ourself being eternal and unlimited, these sorts of concepts, which are ultimately true, they can feel foreign to us. But I'll say again, they're only foreign if we're living in a mind and a body and not living in our soul and beyond. Okay? That's the only reason that they feel foreign. And we can challenge it and go, no, of course I'm not immortal. Of course I'm not eternal, etc., etc. But who's saying that? And that's part of the self-inquiry. Who is making me so small? Who in here is making me limited? Who in here is making me lonely or isolated? Who in there is actually creating that perceived reality? And this is the joy of self-inquiry and the study of the self, because not only is it fascinating, but you can free yourself from that self that is doing all of that. With the practice of Svadhyaya, we can discover that the majority of our problems and hardships are due to having an identity crisis. And this is why in my Mind Detox book, I shared that I believe it is the ultimate cause. You know, we have many different causes for different conditions and different emotional things and different behaviors and habits and all that sort of stuff. And we can get into the nitty gritty, and they've all got these individual causes. And I found thousands, literally thousands of causes to things over the last 20 years of working with people to find the cause every single day, multiple times every single day. And yet, the ultimate soul cause, hear that how you wish, soul cause is an identity crisis. Identity crisis is when we believe we are someone or something that we're ultimately not only that. But in that moment, we're believing this is what I am. This is who I am. Okay. Classic examples is that we believe that we're the thoughts in our head and the voice in our head that sounds like us. We believe we are the feelings that we're having, whether that's physical sensations or emotions. We believe we are our body, having identified in it from a very young age. And we believe we're all these other things that we can attach to ourself, like I'm a conservative, I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, I'm whatever. I'm an architect, I'm a housewife, I'm a house husband, or whatever. All these labels that we can apply to ourselves. Anytime we are believing we're one of these labels, ultimately it's a form of identity crisis. Now, I'm not saying it's not an aspect of yourself or it's not what you're kind of doing while you're here, walking on this earth. But when we get to the realm of drawing identity from it, it's a slippery slope. It's a slippery slope. The good news is that wanting to know thyself, wanting to know who you are, is innate, is built in. We're all, whether we're aware of it or not, on that quest. We've all been trying to answer the question, who am I? Who am I? Okay. But all these things that I mentioned previously, they're all temporary. They're transient. They can change. They can even be taken away. And that's why life is a lot more stressful and scary if we are living only within these realms and believing ourselves to be these things. Who am I if I believe I am this relationship, or I am this job, or I am this, the way this body looks, for example? The ultimate thing that occurs when we're not self-studying is that we usually end up with discontentment and a little bit of frustration. We end up often getting to a point where we ask ourselves, is there more to life than this? Is there more to life than this? But I would like to suggest that whenever you have that question, is there more to life than this? What we're really asking, is there more to me than this? Is there more to me than this? Which takes me to a quote from my friend Sarkan, who we had a chat with last year, talking about this subject, self-inquiry. So if you haven't watched that, feel free to watch that replay again. But I warn you, hold on to your seat as you listen to that replay, because he doesn't hold back. And he has very strong opinions and views on this whole subject. But enjoy the interview nonetheless. My friend Sarkan said that I am bigger than everything that is happening in front of me. I am bigger than anything that's happening in front of me. You see, all these things, the thoughts, the emotions, the physical sensations, the circumstances, they're all happening kind of in front of you, if you think about it. He said, everything in front of me cannot tell me the fullness of me, the source of who I am. But everything in front of me is part of my I amness. So we need to stop taking our identity from anything we are aware of. There is no need to reject anything. Everything is infused with sacredness and divinity, the one expressing itself in all of its glory. Everything is infused with sacredness and divinity, the one expressing itself in all of its glory. What changes is your perspective. Everything is that, including me. The one doesn't have parts, and yet I am it. Everything that is, I am. Everything doesn't have parts outside itself. Who I, who I really am can't ultimately be found or felt. Realization happens when you see the lie for the lie and the truth for the truth. It is self evident. Nothing to add, nothing is missing. Only the subtleties of the mind pretending to be me. And that's really why I wanted to share that beautiful quote is that last line is really at the heart of self-inquiry and the study of the self. You are studying the subtleties of the mind pretending to be me. Not me, you. You know what I'm saying. Apply that personally. That is perhaps the simplest, most potent educational the definitions of self-inquiry and the point of it. You're studying the subtleties of the mind pretending to be me in many different forms, shapes, and guises and identities. Okay. So in its simplest dissolved down form, either eyes open during the day if you catch yourself, or if you're intending to do it during closed eye meditation, you're looking to challenge anything that is saying who you are or what you are, and challenge the self that is saying that. Okay. So that's why it can be subtle, because self-inquiry can sometimes get caught up in the content, which I'm going to come on to in a minute. But really, we're looking to go beyond the content that's the obvious stuff to actually who's the me that is gaining a sense of self and an identity from this stuff that I'm aware of. And that's why Sarkhan, I believe, says that everything in front of me cannot tell me the fullness of me, the source of who I am. But we're so often drawing our sense of self, our sense of existence, and our identity from stuff we're aware of, from our thoughts, from the voice in our head, from our feelings, from our body. Can you relate to that? Does this make sense? Does this make sense? So here's the funny thing about that whole process is that we end up relying on the mind to tell us who we are. We end up relying on the mind to tell us who we are. And that's why we need to see through the subtleties of the mind pretending to be me. But the mind can't tell you who you are because the mind can't see beyond itself. The mind is a thought or a bunch of thoughts, but it's only the current thought, really. And it can never answer the question, who am I? Because a thought cannot see beyond itself. Okay? A thought cannot see beyond itself. It would be wonderful if we could just kind of, I don't know, if our self-realization was in a little box with a pretty bow in it, and it could be a thought. Oh, I know myself. Ding. That's it, ding. If it was just as simple as a thought, I know myself, then we could all do it. We all would have done it. We could have just done it in the first 5 minutes of this conversation. Can you see what I'm trying to emphasize in there? It's subtle, but it's never going to be I know myself thought, right? Because it's just a thought and it can't see beyond itself. So we have to go beyond that, okay? But what essentially happens though, when we don't go beyond that, is a thought imagines that I'm a cluster of thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. The mind basically concludes that it's a body mind. And we then go about feeling our thoughts and our emotions and our body. And with that imagination, an imaginary self is created, made up of thoughts and feelings. And that's really how we create this small self. And this, I call it imaginary self because I think it's quite a powerful way of putting it. I'm not undermining its existence. It's there. Imagination is, it's happening. But when you call a spade, it kind of loses its power and we lose our fear about it. So an imaginary self is brought into imaginary existence. And we gain a sense of self from it. And I am offended Now I'm sad. Now I'm trying to avoid future stress, struggle, and suffering. There's now this I that's trying to do this. But when you try to find that I, can you find it? Or is it a thought supported by kind of like a sense of self? You still with me? You still here? Okay. But here's the thing, it's the imaginary self that believes that it is broken, limited, and separate. So if there's any of that going on, you know you're in the imaginary self. You're in the small self. Okay. It is very easy to kind of how do I say it? Relate to ourself as a collection of parts, as a part instead of a unified whole. A unified whole. We lose our unified self by identifying too strongly in the individual parts. Okay. And we spend the rest of our life trying to put ourselves back together again. But it was an illusion that we were ever broken into pieces in the first place. Okay. It was an illusion that we were ever limited or that we were ever separate. By illusion, I don't mean not real, I mean not as it appears. Okay. So Svadhyaya, and I'd say meditation, can reveal our unbroken nature. And this is true healing. Healing is the restoration of oneness, of wholeness. Okay. But again, to be honest, this is just pretty words or spiritual words. But until we actually study the self for ourself, then it's just, like I said, word salad. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about yoga. We're talking about yoga. The study of the self, the diet, it's a real key part of yoga. Now, yoga is not about being stretchy or being able to look good in lycra and touch your toes or, I don't know, all that sort of stuff, although it can be a part of it. Yoga comes from the Sanskrit word which means to unite, or it also means divine union. Yoga is the restoration of union, a united wholeness. Okay. And in the Bhagavad, I always find this word hard to say. It's like the wires in my head just don't let me say it. But in the Bhagavad Gita, it says yoga is the journey of the self, through the self, to the self. And I'd like to add that it's the final self there that's actually the capital S self. Okay. So it's a journey of the self, through the self, to the self. So yoga is the practice that the small self does, in a way, to get through the small self to reveal the big self. But how do we do this? Well, I'm going to suggest there's a couple elements of it that we can all do. We've all been doing, and you can continue to do if you wish. And I'm going to quote from the first 4 verses of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It says, "Welcome to you who are well prepared. Here is your manual to keep you anchored in consciousness as you navigate the world, the illusion, the simulation. But in order to stay anchored to consciousness, you will have to learn how to still your mind. Our mind can turn any situation into heaven or hell. So if you can control your mind, circumstances in your body or external world can't affect your peace. If you can still your mind, you will access your own true essence, which is the power of pure seeing itself, the one who truly sees. The one who truly sees. If you cannot still your mind, you will think you are your mind and you will suffer." That's the first 4 verses, for first 4 sutras. So that tells us very clearly right there what we need to do for self-inquiry, for the study of the self. It comes with two parts. See the mind, still the mind. See the mind, still the mind. You want to see that your thoughts that arise in the form of imagination and see them as imagination and not true reality. You want to see the thoughts about the past and future. See that they are never happening now. These thoughts are never about what's happening now. See that. That's the study of the self. You need to see the illusion of the past self and the future self that you might think is real. See your habitual thinking patterns. When you close your eyes, see the thinking patterns. See the patterns. See the familiar thoughts and the special stories. We need to see the voice in our head that sounds like us. That's a really big one, guys. I met many people that had done a whole 6-month intensive meditation retreat to mastery of the self, it was called. And many of them left that still not seeing the voice in their head. And it was still in control. It was still running the show. They still believed it to be themselves. We want to see the judgments, the beliefs, the expectations, the assumptions, the millions of mind reads that we do on a daily basis about what other people are probably thinking. You see it all so that you're not harmed by it anymore. You're not ruled by it anymore. You see it, you don't be it. Remember that phrase? See it, don't be it. I wrote that back in 2012, that one. See it, don't be it. Actually, 2014, it came out in the book, but yeah, I wrote it before then. But see it, don't be it. I think that book's having its 10th anniversary, actually. See it, don't be it. So what is study of the self? The first step, first thing to do, see the mind. See the mind. See all that's going on. So it's not just about shutting it up. It's actually about seeing it, seeing through it. In fact, I would say it's more powerful to see through the illusion of it than just to just shut it up. You got to see through the illusion of it. Why? Well, because if you just master shutting it up, what happens when it starts to talk again? You're back. You're gonna fall back fast asleep again. You're gonna be back caught up in it all. You're gonna be believing it's all you and it's all true, and so you really need to see it. So it's a really important part of the whole process, and that's why when you're using mind calm meditation, there's long periods where you're invited just to be consciously aware and observe, be seeing it. With this new knowledge, you can add to these gaps between thinking the calm thoughts and engaging Gawa and stuff, and you can self-inquire. You can challenge what's happening. Who's saying this? Is it true? Is it real? Etc. etc. You can actually start to challenge it. You can also challenge the challenger. See through the questioner. See through the thinker. There's multiple levels of this, and you've no excuse to be bored in any meditation whatsoever or trying to get to the end of it. If you are, see the bit of you that's trying to get to the end of it, and that's the bit that's living in time. Okay? And that's the bit that believes that your happiness is somewhere in the future, etc., etc. So the study of the self is seeing through all of that, so that we can be free of it. So it stops limiting us, controlling us. But there's a line. There's a line. Okay. I don't want to create navel gazers here. I don't want you to get too meta here. I don't want you to get too caught up in the nitty-gritties of the mind, because you're only ever going to be witnessing the projection from the source self, not actually recognized as the self. Okay. If you just stay caught up in the content. So I would say that it's great to take a proverbial step back and observe your thoughts, etc. But I also recommend there's a balance between that and getting too caught up in the content. Okay. So there's a healthy balance here. There's nothing black and white in this game. Okay. There's yes, do that, but also not too much. It's one of these things, because if you get too much into it, then I see people getting too caught up into the mind again, actually, too caught up into the fixer, the healer, ultimately too caught up in the bit themselves that's trying to wake up. And that's a trap as well. Okay, that's a trap as well. So, how do you get around that? Well, whilst you're exploring this wonderful seeing through all the stuff that's going on, seeing the lies to the lie and the truth to the truth, as we said earlier, it can help to be interested in what everything you're witnessing is being presented to. Okay? What is it all being presented to within you? Because I don't want your focus to get too out there in the, trying to see all my thoughts and da. You'll see them. They'll be there. But what's it all being presented to? What's that? What's that? What's it all happening within and what's it all being presented to? Okay. What that does, it naturally re-reveals the context of all that content that's been going on. And you don't lose yourself in the content. And you start to experience much more stillness, more silence, more presence, more peace. Wonderful. And you do the second recommendation from yoga, which is to still the mind. Okay. Now, like I said, you don't just want to still the mind because you need to see through the lies and the illusions. Okay. Once and for all. But you also do when studying the self, you do want to be playing with quieting the mind. You want to play with, what's it called? Mind calm? Does that sound familiar? That little phrase, that old chestnut. Why ultimately do we want to do that? Well, because if it's too loud and busy in there, there's just too much loudness, busyness, and distraction to see beyond it and to discover the more the subtleties and to just get beyond it all. It's just like all in your face. Does that make sense? So if someone was to try to study the self without simultaneously playing with quietening and letting the dust settle on the inside, some of you might have heard me say previously in the recent retreat I did, letting the dust settle. If you just focus on the dust and you don't actually let the dust settle, then it's harder to recognize more of yourself that's beyond just the content and the flashy, sparkly, imaginary images that are happening. Okay. So we want to keep practicing Gawo. We want to keep practicing the mind calm meditation. I urge you to do that. And we want to keep playing with the mind calm games. Okay. Because these three things that you've got that are just your staple things that I urge you to keep playing with, they're all for being consciously aware, for letting the dust settle, for experiencing more inner quietness and calm and stillness. Okay. By seeing and stilling your mind, I wrote earlier, you can awaken the power, the joy, peace, love, truth, clarity, insight, wisdom, and compassion of pure consciousness. And you can also go beyond it to sit in the source of the self. So you can reveal more aspects of consciousness, beautiful aspects of consciousness, but also through true study of the self, you can sit in the source of the self. The source of the self that is arising in any experience whatsoever. Anything that you can be aware of whatsoever. You can sit in the source of that. Boom. And it's a wonderful seat. It's the best seat you can sit in. What do you do with this information? Well, we cover a lot when we're actually just talking amongst ourselves there. But what do you want to do with this information? find the balance between exploring and investigating and challenging the mind without getting too caught up in the mind, getting too caught up in over analyzing, over fixating on it, over getting too meta with all of this. It's a fine line. But you need to see through the mind. You're looking to see through the illusions of it, the lies of it, the myths, truths, the subtle programming, conditioning, all of that sort of stuff. We get to see through it. It's not enough just to shut it up and try to ignore it, because when it does eventually inevitably pipe up again, we're going to be right back in believing it all is real, true, and identifying in it as ourself. Okay, so it's a fine line, and we have to do both seeing the mind and playing with stilling the mind. Okay. There's a lot of self-inquiry in this. And so I invite you to, this week, just play with a couple very simple self-inquiry questions. Who's saying this? Who's talking to who in here? Who's feeling this? Is it me? It's very simple, just starting to just chip away how real it all feels in there, and how real all this imaginary stuff that's going on actually is. So there's some simple questions. I'm going to share a lot more bigger ones next time. But who's saying this? Who's feeling this? Who's talking to who in here? Who's judging who? Who's upset with who? Who's angry with who? Who's talking to who? Because often, like someone said during when we weren't recording, they said I'm often having arguments with people that aren't even here. Like, it's not even arguments with myself; it's arguing with other people. But the interesting thing in that example, that perfect example as to why we need to study the self, is that in that example, obviously the person that we're arguing with isn't real; it's imaginary. But so is the one that's having the argument with that imaginary self. They're also part of the imagination, okay? And through that whole thing, we're just suffering from our imagination. And I'm not undermining it. There might be some therapy required or whatever, but the ultimate thing is I want to stop people suffering from their own imagination. You know, it goes way back to that old story I've shared a million times about Jaws in the wardrobe. When I was a kid, I watched the movie Jaws, and I was convinced that the big shark from the movie was in my wardrobe. And I would shake and sweat under the covers with fear. I was petrified that at night Jaws was going to come out of the wardrobe and eat me. Until my dad said the wonderfully wise words, "Son, Jaws isn't in the wardrobe, he's in your imagination." How much of our stress, struggle, and suffering is caused by our own personal Jawsies? Okay? Study the self can help us to see through the voice in our head that sounds like us, the images, the emotions, the feelings, the body sensations, the world circumstances, our life that we believe ourselves to be having, the person we believe ourselves to be amidst all of that. It's a huge thing to explore, and yet it's immediate, challenging the current identity, who I think I am right now, who I believe myself to be right now. Because we're often defending that self. That's the self that we're defending. That's the self that's offended. That's the self that we're trying to protect all the time. That's the self that's in lack. That's the self that is mortal and is scared of its own demise. When you wake up from that, beyond that, and recognize the self, so much fear falls away, so much frustration, and so much fulfillment floods in and fills that space. So play with some self-study, self-inquiry this week. And I'm going to leave you with a little open-eyed meditation to play with. And it's very, very simple. Not going to spend a lot of time on it. I'm just going to share it with you, and you can go and play with it if you wish. And it's the first mantra from the Know Thyself meditation. So the first mantra from the Know Thyself meditation, which is part of Soul Calm. And it's simply Satanama. Satanama. Sa, ta, ti, na, as in no, na, and ma, as in mum. Satanama. Okay? Satanama. Satanama together means my true essence, my true identity. It's Sanskrit for my true essence, my true identity. Satanama. Okay? Sa translates as infinite. Ta means life. Na means death. And ma means rebirth. Satanama. Okay? Satanama. So individually, it means infinity, life, death, and rebirth. And together, it means my true essence, my true identity. Okay? Satanama utilizes the primal sounds and vibrations, just so you know. Sa is birth, the beginning, infinity, the totality of everything that ever was, is, or will be. Sa. Ta is life, existence, creativity, which manifests from infinity. Creativity that manifests from infinity. And everything we're doing with self-inquiry and study of the self is to reveal and gain this infinite perspective, the infinite perspective. Okay? And until you identify as infinite, you ain't done. All these things people identify with these days, just identify as infinite. And you're doing pretty good. All right. That's not a new concept to get. I mean, literally, it's like an infinite perspective, all completely all inclusive. Na means death, but what it really means is change and transformation of consciousness. It's change and transformation. And Ma means rebirth, regeneration, resurrection, which allows us to consciously experience the joy of the infinite. Oh, how beautiful is that? Satanama. Now, the mantra of Satanama is it's known to aid attention, concentration, focus, and a better mood. It's also known to calm you down and increase serotonin. So it affects anyone that's experiencing stress, depression, anxiety, all that sort of stuff. So it's a really powerful mantra, okay? If you want, you can close your eyes. The focus point is the soles of the feet. If you wish to use it with your eyes closed between now and next time, it would just be that one mantra. Close your eyes, get in, engage Gabo, and sit. And every time you catch yourself thinking or whatever, you just think to yourself, Satanama, and you just let the dust settle. You just observe, or you self-inquire. You see what's going on in there. You challenge it a bit. Who's talking to who? Who's trying to be peaceful right now in this meditation? Who's trying to be here? Are they ever going to be? Who are they? Void of them, is there just beingness? There's so much to explore. I love this topic. I could talk forever, but I'm going to shut up. So enjoy playing with Satanama. It's a beautiful mantra. I'll revisit it a bit next week, and then we'll talk a bit more about the study of the self, do a meditation, closed eye, and we'll just have a rather nice time together, as always. Until then, I wish you infinite peace, limitless love, and bye for now. Thanks for joining me for today's episode. Please like, subscribe, and write a review wherever you happen to be listening. It really does help to support me and this podcast. For more information about my one-to-one sessions, Calm Clan community, books, and academy courses, head over now to minddetox.com.